Welcome to Dead Good Stories. We have some disturbing and scary horror stories to help you sleep tonight. If you enjoy these stories, please like, comment, or subscribe. Otherwise, lie back, relax, and let sleep consume you. The old house had always held an aura of mystery, one that enveloped everything within its walls. Its creaking floorboards and peeling wallpaper whispered tales of the past, making every corner feel like it had a story to tell. Living there for 3 years, I'd grown accustomed to the strange noises and fleeting shadows, but the basement had always been a different matter. It was as if a veil separated the basement from the rest of the house, a threshold I had never been willing to cross. On an unusually quiet evening, I was curled up with a book when I heard it, a faint scratching sound emanating from the basement. My heart raced. It wasn't the first time I'd heard noises from below, but this time felt different. Compelled by a mix of curiosity and dread, I set the book aside and made my way to the basement door. As I descended the stairs, the dampness enveloped me like a cold embrace. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing cobwebs clinging to the corners and dust motes swirling in the stale air. Each step echoed in the silence, amplifying my unease. The scratching intensified, now accompanied by a faint, almost imperceptible whispering, as if the walls themselves were trying to communicate something hidden away. I followed the sound, navigating through the clutter of old furniture and forgotten belongings. It led me to the farthest corner, where I found a door I hadn't noticed before. It was wooden, warped, and covered in dust. A strange compulsion urged me to open it. With a deep breath, I grasped the doorknob and turned it slowly. As the door creaked open, my flashlight illuminated a hidden room filled with an unsettling collection of items. Newspapers from the 1980s lay scattered across the floor, yellowed with age and filled with grim headlines about missing persons. The images of smiling faces looked back at me, frozen in time. In the center of the room stood a makeshift altar, adorned with candles and trinkets, remnants of a life long gone. The whispers grew louder, reverberating off the walls, and I felt a chill race down my spine. Instinctively, I stepped back, my heart pounding in my chest. The realization hit me like a punch. This room held secrets that were never meant to see the light of day. It was a shrine to memories, a dark homage to those who had vanished. That night I lay awake in bed, my mind racing. The noises continued from the basement, echoing through the stillness of the house. Each creak and thud was a reminder of what I had uncovered. I felt trapped, knowing that whatever had happened in that hidden space was now a part of my life. Unable to shake the feeling of being watched, I finally decided to call the police. They arrived, their expressions a mix of curiosity and skepticism. As they explored the basement, I remained outside, anxiously pacing on the porch. The officers' voices drifted up from the depths, but I couldn't make out their words. When they emerged, their demeanor had shifted. They informed me that the previous owner had been linked to several unsolved disappearances, though he had never faced charges. My blood ran cold as they described the cases, each name echoing in my mind like a sinister chant. In the days that followed, I tried to return to normal life, but the basement had changed everything. The shadows seemed darker, and the whispers, now a part of my daily routine, haunted me. I often found myself standing at the top of the stairs, staring into the abyss below, fighting the urge to explore further. The sounds never stopped. They became an unsettling background to my life, a constant reminder of the secrets lurking just out of sight. Even with the police report filed and the case supposedly closed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not alone. I began to question the safety of my home, aware that some things are better left buried in the darkness, untouched and forgotten. As nights turned into weeks, I realized the true horror was not merely what had happened in that basement, but the knowledge that sometimes the past refuses to remain hidden, reaching out to ensnare those who dare to pry into its depths. The road was winding and dark, surrounded by trees that loomed like ancient sentinels. My uncle had always been a cautious driver, but that night felt particularly eerie. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a silvery glow on the asphalt. As he navigated the twists and turns, he couldn't shake the sensation that he was being watched, a feeling that settled deep in his gut. Suddenly, he spotted her, a figure standing on the side of the road, illuminated by his headlights. She wore a long white dress that billowed gently in the breeze, and her hair flowed like a dark river over her shoulders. The sight of her struck a chord deep within him, both captivating and disconcerting. He hesitated, but something compelled him to pull over. As she stepped into the vehicle, he felt a strange mix of relief and apprehension. She seemed lost yet oddly calm, her gaze fixed ahead as if she were traveling to a destination only she could see. They drove in silence, the quiet punctuated by the soft hum of the engine and the rhythmic sound of tires on the road. With every mile, he stole glances at her from the corner of his eye. She appeared almost ethereal, an image that felt out of place in his car. The distance between them narrowed, yet an unexplainable chasm remained, as if she were both present and apart from him. After a while, she pointed to a house nestled in the woods. It was old and weathered, the kind that looked like it had seen countless seasons come and go. He nodded and slowed down, the gravel crunching beneath the tires as he pulled to a stop. But before he could turn to offer her a parting word, she vanished from the seat beside him. In disbelief, he scanned the car, his heart racing. There was no trace of her, just the lingering scent of her presence and a chilling silence that filled the space where she had been. Confused and shaken, he stepped out, looking around for any sign of her. The night was still, the only sound the rustling leaves above, whispering secrets he could not understand. He approached the house, an instinct pulling him toward the door. Each step felt heavy, laden with an unspeakable dread. As he knocked, he felt an overwhelming sense of urgency, as if the very ground beneath him vibrated with unspoken truths. A man answered, and when my uncle described the woman, he paled, his expression shifting from curiosity to fear. The man explained the grim reality. The woman my uncle had picked up had died in a car accident on that very road many years prior. Her spirit, it seemed, lingered, trapped between worlds, seeking solace and closure that had never come. That evening marked a turning point in my uncle's life. He returned home, haunted by the encounter and the weight of the revelation. Every time he drove down that stretch of road afterward, the memory of her presence clung to him like a shadow. He found himself looking for her figure in the darkness, half expecting her to appear again. But the road remained empty. The experience became a parable of sorts, shared among family gatherings and whispered about at bonfires. My uncle could never shake the feeling that something larger was at play, an unseen world brushing against ours, where the lines between life and death blurred in the most unsettling ways. Though he tried to rationalize the incident, a part of him understood the truth. Some encounters leave an indelible mark, forever altering the fabric of reality. The memory of the hitchhiker became an echo in his mind, a haunting reminder of the unknown lurking just beyond the veil of everyday life. When the new neighbor moved in, our quiet suburban street buzzed with a mix of curiosity and excitement. He seemed friendly enough at first, always waving as he unloaded boxes and greeting everyone with a smile. His house was slightly worn but had a charm that made it stand out among the others. For a while he fit seamlessly into the neighborhood, participating in small talk during community gatherings and mingling with families at barbecues. As the weeks passed, however, an unsettling feeling began to creep in. It started with my younger sister, who reported seeing him standing outside our house at odd hours, gazing intently through our windows. At first, I dismissed her concerns as a child's overactive imagination. Yet as I began to pay attention, I noticed peculiar things. The way he always seemed to be around whenever we were outside, the slight hesitation in his smile that seemed to linger a moment too long. The oddities escalated when our dog, usually calm and friendly, began barking furiously every night. His growls were unlike anything I had ever heard, a deep, instinctual warning that made my skin crawl. I tried to rationalize it, thinking perhaps there was an animal outside, but each time I felt the prickling sensation of being watched. I found myself looking out the window, searching for movement, but every time I did, he was nowhere to be found. One evening, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I had stayed up late, unable to shake the feeling of unease that clung to me. As the clock ticked toward 2 a.m., I crept to the window and peeked out, my heart racing. It was a quiet night, the street bathed in the eerie glow of streetlights, but then I saw him. He stood in his front yard, almost statue-like, staring directly at our house. A chill spread through me. I couldn't tell if he was aware of my gaze, but I felt a connection. a silent tension that seemed to fill the space between us. Fear coiled tightly in my chest, and I pulled back from the window, my mind racing with what to do next. There was a darkness in his presence, something primal that made my instincts scream. When I could take it no longer, I picked up the phone and called the police, explaining the situation as best as I could. While waiting for them to arrive, I paced the living room, glancing toward the front door as if expecting it to burst open. The shadows outside loomed larger than life, making it difficult to distinguish reality from imagination. Minutes felt like hours, but finally I heard the unmistakable sound of sirens approaching. When the officers arrived, they examined the situation but found nothing amiss. My heart sank as they assured me that he was probably just a curious neighbor. But deep down, I knew better. Days turned into weeks, and the feeling of being watched grew stronger. It was as if he could sense my apprehension, feeding off it. He seemed to revel in it, maintaining that same unsettling smile whenever he crossed paths with my family. Then one day I noticed police tape surrounding his house. News of his arrest spread like wildfire through the neighborhood, shattering the fragile facade he had maintained. It turned out that he was running a drug operation from within those walls, his innocent demeanor masking a much darker reality. I was left in a daze, trying to comprehend the twisted web he had spun around us. The revelation transformed my perception of safety, shattering the illusion that the people around us could be trusted. What unnerved me most was the realization that he had been watching us too, studying our routines, learning our vulnerabilities. Even after he was taken away, the echoes of his presence lingered. The shadows in our yard felt deeper, the night more oppressive. The barking of our dog became a distant memory, replaced by an uneasy silence that stretched out into the darkness. I learned to be more vigilant, to scrutinize the seemingly ordinary. In the weeks that followed, my heart grew heavy with an unsettling understanding. Beneath the surface of our idyllic community lay secrets that could darken even the sunniest of days. The fear that he had instilled in me remained, a whispering reminder that sometimes the most sinister threats come from those who seem the most familiar. In a small town where the sun shone bright and the streets were usually filled with laughter, the annual fair was the highlight of the summer. Families gathered for the rides, games, and cotton candy, their faces painted with joy. The atmosphere was vibrant, alive with the sound of children's laughter and the sizzling of food on the grill. But that year, the fair took a dark turn when a little girl vanished. Her disappearance sent shockwaves through the community, the jubilant energy shifting to one of despair. The girl's parents, frantic and distraught, called for help as they searched the grounds. With every passing moment, the urgency intensified, creating a palpable sense of fear. People joined in, fanning out across the fair, calling her name, their voices blending into a haunting echo. Days turned into an agonizing week, filled with uncertainty and anguish. Flyers adorned every lamppost and shop window, her sweet smile staring back at the townsfolk, a grim reminder of the horror unfolding. The community banded together, organizing search parties that combed the nearby woods and fields, scouring every inch of land for any sign of her. Hope flickered like a candle in a storm. Each lead met with a growing sense of desperation. Just when the townspeople began to lose hope, a tip came in that led the police to a secluded area not far from the fairgrounds. As they ventured into the woods, the feeling of dread hung heavy over them. The trees loomed tall, casting long shadows that whispered of secrets long buried. When they finally stumbled upon her tiny body, the reality struck like a cold wave of anguish. She had been hidden away, taken too soon, and the innocence of childhood extinguished. The investigation revealed a horrifying truth. A family friend, a trusted figure who had offered to help search for her, had orchestrated the abduction. He had been lurking in the background, watching the fair unfold, calculating his every move. For months, he had ingratiated himself into the family's life, all the while harboring dark intentions. When the truth came to light, the town felt shattered. The betrayal cut deep, igniting fear and suspicion among neighbors who had once been close. The very person they had welcomed into their homes had hidden a darkness that was unfathomable. Rumors spread like wildfire, casting shadows over friendships and eroding trust. For the girl's family, the world would never be the same. Grief turned into a haunting presence, lingering in the corners of their lives. They would forever be haunted by the what-ifs and if-onlys that plagued their thoughts. The fair, once a symbol of joy, became a reminder of their unimaginable loss, a day marked by tragedy instead of celebration. In the months that followed, the town struggled to regain its footing. Children played, but the laughter felt different, tinged with an undercurrent of fear. Parents became more vigilant, eyes scanning playgrounds and streets, their hearts gripped with the knowledge that danger can wear a familiar face. Though the days grew longer and the seasons changed, the shadow of that summer fair lingered, a dark cloud that hung over the community. In their efforts to move forward, they organized vigils and support groups, creating a network of compassion in the face of darkness. Yet, the echoes of that little girl's laughter haunted their memories, a bittersweet reminder of the fragility of life and the hidden dangers that can lurk within their midst. As time marched on, the townspeople learned to live with the scars left by tragedy. They would tell the story of the missing child, a solemn reminder to hold their loved ones close and never take a moment for granted. The fair would return in subsequent years, but it would forever carry the weight of loss, a testament to the resilience of a community that had faced its darkest hour and emerged, forever changed. After months of battling a persistent ailment, I finally found myself scheduled for surgery at a small-town hospital that had served the community for decades. My nerves flared as I walked through the sterile halls, the scent of antiseptic permeating the air, mingling with the faint sound of distant chatter. The hospital, with its stark white walls and fluorescent lights, felt like a maze, each turn leading deeper into the unknown. Once in the recovery room, I drifted in and out of consciousness, the anesthesia pulling me into a foggy oblivion. I could hear voices murmuring around me, but they faded into whispers, indistinct and eerie. Each time I opened my eyes, the room felt more surreal. Nurses moved about, their faces a blur as they tended to other patients, yet I felt an unsettling awareness that something was off. It was during one of those half-awake moments that I first sensed it, a shadow lurking at the edge of my vision. Whenever I turned my head, the figure dissolved into the background, leaving only a chill in its wake. As the hours passed, I struggled to shake the feeling, but it clung to me like an unwelcome guest. Night fell, and the hospital transformed into an eerie realm, illuminated only by the flickering fluorescent lights that buzzed overhead. My room grew colder, and I could hear the faint sounds of machinery beeping rhythmically, creating an unsettling symphony. I tried to sleep, but the shadows danced just beyond my reach, teasing me with glimpses of movement that felt too deliberate to be figments of my imagination. On one particularly restless night, I overheard two nurses discussing a patient zero who had gone missing from a locked ward. The hushed tones of their conversation sent a shiver down my spine. As the details unfolded, I realized they were speaking of a violent criminal who had escaped during a chaotic incident a few nights before. Anxiety surged through me, intertwining with the fog of anesthesia, heightening my senses. When I caught sight of a figure in the hallway outside my room, my heart raced. The silhouette was distorted and obscured, yet I felt a magnetic pull, as if it were beckoning me closer. I struggled against the weakness in my limbs, fighting the urge to succumb to the sleep that threatened to swallow me whole. The figure lingered, almost as if it were gauging my reaction. As I drifted in and out of consciousness, flashes of memories invaded my mind. Scenes of the escape, the panic that followed, and the frantic search that ensued. My heart pounded as I envisioned the possibility of that criminal lurking in the hospital, hidden among the staff, using the chaos of the night to blend in. The whispers around me grew louder, and I felt as though I were in the eye of a storm, where the chaos of the outside world clashed with my fragile state. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The unease settled deeper into my bones, making every creak of the building sound like a warning. The shadows began to close in, and I became hyper-aware of every sound, the faint rustle of scrubs, the muted clattering of instruments, and the distant echo of hurried footsteps. The following morning I awoke to find the hospital bustling with activity. Nurses and doctors moved about with a sense of urgency, but beneath the surface I could still sense something unsettling. The memories of the night before lingered, wrapping themselves around me like a shroud. I overheard snippets of conversation about the escape, the search teams scouring the area, and the heightened security protocols being put in place. As I recovered, I couldn't help but glance toward the window, watching the world outside continue without me. The sun shone brightly, But within the walls of that hospital, shadows persisted, reminding me of the darkness that lurked just out of sight. Even after I was discharged, the experience haunted me. I returned home with a sense of relief, yet a part of me remained unsettled. I often found myself staring out of my window, scanning the neighborhood, convinced that the boundaries of safety were thinner than they appeared. The whispers of the hospital echoed in my mind, a constant reminder that the hidden dangers of the world could breach even the most sacred places. In the months that followed, I became more cautious, aware of the fragility of trust. I learned to be vigilant, carrying the weight of my experience like an unseen burden. The memory of the hospital and its secrets lingered, a specter of fear that followed me into everyday life. When my family relocated to a quaint suburban neighborhood, everything seemed perfect. The streets were lined with charming houses, the lawns manicured, and children played freely in the evenings. But amid the idyllic surroundings, the Smith family next door quickly caught my attention, their peculiar behavior igniting a sense of unease. At first, it was the odd hours that struck me as strange. The Smiths rarely emerged during the day, preferring to keep their curtains drawn tight. Occasionally, I would catch a glimpse of their two children through the window, always sitting in the dark, shadows playing on their faces. The parents appeared overly friendly, waving and smiling too widely, yet their eyes seemed devoid of warmth. A lingering discomfort hung in the air, and my mother often remarked on their oddness, but we tried to brush it off as mere curiosity. One summer afternoon, while playing outside with my friends, I noticed a faint sound drifting over the fence. It was a soft whimpering, a muffled sound that seemed to call out from the depths of the Smith's yard. I glanced at my friends, who were engrossed in a game, but the noise beckoned me. Intrigued, I decided to investigate. I crept to the side of the house, peering through a gap in the wooden fence. What I saw sent chills racing down my spine. In the dim light of the backyard, I could make out the silhouettes of two children, tangled in what looked like rusted chains, their faces pale and drawn. They were crouched against the rough bark of a tree, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and longing. My heart raced as I took in the scene, an urge to help warring with the fear of what I had uncovered. I darted back to my house, my mind racing with panic. I found my parents in the living room, but when I recounted what I had seen, they dismissed it as an overactive imagination. Frustrated and scared, I turned to a trusted neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, an elderly woman with a reputation for keeping an eye on the community. She listened closely, her brow furrowing with concern as I described the scene. In the following days, I noticed more oddities. The Smiths never left the house during daylight hours, and the muffled sounds continued to drift over the fence, tugging at my conscience. I felt an insatiable need to protect the children I had seen, but without proof, there was little I could do. Still, the nagging feeling wouldn't let me rest. After days of worrying, I finally mustered the courage to share my concerns with my school counselor. She listened attentively, and after what felt like an eternity, she decided to take action. A couple of days later, I noticed police cars parked in front of the Smith's house. A mixture of relief and dread washed over me as officers approached the door, their faces stern and serious. The investigation revealed a nightmarish reality. The children had been kept in horrific conditions, subjected to years of neglect and abuse. Their parents, once perceived as friendly and welcoming, were revealed to be deeply disturbed individuals who had orchestrated their confinement. The neighborhood was rocked to its core. Families that had waved to the Smiths over the years now felt a deep sense of betrayal. In the aftermath, whispers spread throughout the community as residents grappled with the hidden darkness that had lurked so close to home. The children were placed into protective custody, their fragile lives forever altered by the cruelty they had endured. In the months that followed, I watched as the Smiths' house stood empty, a grim reminder of the horror that had unfolded within its walls. My innocence shattered. I learned that evil often hides behind familiar faces, and that sometimes the most pressing duty is to act on instinct, even when the truth is too terrifying to acknowledge. The experience left an indelible mark on my childhood, a haunting lesson about the fragility of safety and the courage it takes to confront the darkness that can lie just next door. Every summer, My friends and I looked forward to our camping trips in the dense, sprawling woods that surrounded our town. We had our favorite spots, tucked away from the busy trails, where we could laugh and share ghost stories under a canopy of stars. The thrill of adventure filled the air as we set off on a sunny Friday afternoon, our hearts racing with anticipation for the weekend ahead. After hiking for a couple of hours, we reached our chosen campsite, a secluded clearing surrounded by towering trees. We quickly set up our tents, the smell of pine and earth invigorating our spirits. As dusk fell, we gathered around the fire, roasting marshmallows and telling tales of local legends, stories of lost hikers, eerie sightings, and the haunting calls of the forest at night. It was all in good fun until we began to hear something strange. At first, it was faint, just the rustling of leaves and an occasional snap of a twig. But as the night deepened, the sounds morphed into something more unsettling. Whispers floated through the trees, barely audible but laced with a sense of urgency. A chill crept over us, disrupting the warmth of the fire. My friends exchanged nervous glances, but we tried to dismiss it as the wind playing tricks on us. Curiosity got the better of us. Driven by a mix of bravery and a desire to confront the unknown, we decided to investigate the sounds, armed with flashlights and a sense of camaraderie. As we ventured deeper into the woods, the atmosphere shifted. The shadows grew denser, wrapping around us like a shroud, and the whispers transformed into murmurs that felt almost too intentional. We pressed on, our flashlights cutting through the darkness, illuminating the trunks of ancient trees and the underbrush that crunched beneath our feet. The forest felt alive, pulsing with an energy that made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. It was then that we stumbled upon a small clearing. In its center, a flickering light danced, beckoning us closer. As we approached, we saw a group of people gathered around a fire, their figures cloaked in darkness. They appeared to be older teenagers or young adults, dressed in ragged clothing, their faces obscured by shadows. They sat in an unsettling silence, their gazes fixed intently on the flames, as if entranced by the fire's flickering glow. An unsettling energy filled the air, and we hesitated, an instinctual urge to retreat bubbling to the surface. Suddenly, one of them turned their head, locking eyes with me. A chill shot through me, amplifying the sense of dread that had been building since we entered the woods. The figure grinned, but the expression was far from inviting. It was a wide, toothy smile that felt predatory, filled with a chilling intensity that held me in place. Without a word, we stumbled backward, adrenaline coursing through our veins as we dashed back through the trees, our hearts racing. The sounds of the forest blurred around us, branches snapping and leaves rustling, filling the void of our fear. We didn't stop running until we reached our campsite, breathless and trembling. The once comforting glow of our fire now felt fragile, a flickering shield against the darkness. The rest of the night was a blur of anxious glances and hushed whispers. Each rustle outside our tent sent us into a frenzy of fear, a chorus of imagination running wild with the possibility that we weren't alone in the woods. As dawn broke, I felt a weight lift, but the image of those strangers lingered, a haunting reminder of the darkness that could easily seep into the light. When we finally packed up and left the woods behind, the memory of that night etched itself into my mind. It served as a stark reminder of the hidden dangers lurking in seemingly innocent places, waiting to catch the unwary off guard. I learned that sometimes the thrill of adventure can mask a much darker reality, and the unknown can be far more terrifying than any ghost story told around a campfire. During my college years, I took a part-time job at a local grocery store. It was a typical job that kept me busy while allowing me to focus on my studies. The store was small, nestled between a laundromat and a diner, frequented by friendly neighbors and college students alike. But one fateful night, my mundane routine was shattered by a chilling encounter. The evening began like any other. The store was bustling with customers grabbing last-minute groceries. I was stocking shelves in the back when I first noticed him, a figure clad in dark clothing and wearing a featureless, unsettling mask. At first, I thought it was a joke, perhaps someone playing a prank, but as he stepped inside, the laughter faded. The masked man moved through the aisles with a strange, unhurried grace. He appeared to be browsing, picking up random items but never making his way to the checkout. Instead, he lingered near the snacks and beverages, casting glances toward the customers. A heavy silence settled around him, an unspoken tension that sent chills racing down my spine. My co-workers, usually relaxed and jovial, exchanged uneasy glances, sensing the change in atmosphere. A few customers shifted uncomfortably, whispering amongst themselves, eyes darting toward the man who now stood by the cereal aisle, his body angled as if he were watching. I could feel the hairs on my arms prickling as unease tightened its grip on me. Suddenly, the store's fluorescent lights flickered, casting eerie shadows across the linoleum floor. It was a minor glitch, but it intensified the already thickening tension. I stole glances at my coworkers, who were now nervously eyeing the masked figure. My heart raced, and I fought the instinct to run to the safety of the back room. Then it happened. The masked man reached into his pocket and pulled out a glinting knife, its blade catching the light in a way that made it look ominous. Panic erupted in the store. Customers screamed and began scrambling for the exits, their faces painted with shock and fear. I felt a surge of adrenaline push me into action, and I grabbed the phone to call for help. While I waited for the police to arrive, I glanced back at the man. He seemed unfazed by the chaos unfolding around him. Instead, he stood there, observing the frenzy with an unsettling calmness that sent shivers down my spine. My thoughts raced as I considered the lives at stake, my co-workers, the customers, and even the man himself. In a moment of desperation, I grabbed a can of soup from a nearby shelf and hurled it at him, hoping to distract him long enough for someone to make a move. The can struck him in the chest with a dull thud, and for a brief moment, surprise flickered across his features. That instant was all I needed. I dashed toward the back room, my heart pounding in my chest. I crouched behind the counter, my breath coming in short gasps as I listened to the pandemonium around me. Footsteps echoed in the store, voices filled with fear and urgency. I peered through the window to see the police arriving, their lights flashing in a chaotic swirl of red and blue. Within moments, the masked man bolted for the exit, slipping out the door just as the officers burst in. The store erupted into a flurry of action as they chased him into the night. My heart raced, caught in the tension of uncertainty and fear, praying for everyone's safety. Though the man was never caught, the ordeal left a lasting impact on me. The store resumed its normal routine, but an undercurrent of fear lingered. Customers began to talk about their experiences, whispering about the masked figure who had invaded our safe haven. The once comforting aisles now felt haunted, each shadow a reminder of the vulnerability we all shared. I learned that evil can manifest in unexpected ways, lurking in the mundane moments of life, and that sometimes the threat is hidden in plain sight, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal itself. My once simple job transformed into a lasting memory of fear and vigilance, a reminder to never take safety for granted. The incident served as a stark lesson that danger could strike at any moment, often disguised as the ordinary. Years after my grandmother passed away, I found myself sorting through her old belongings in her dusty attic. The house had been untouched since her funeral, a shrine to a life filled with memories, each box and corner saturated with nostalgia. I'd always admired her collection of antiques, but this was the first time I was truly alone in the space, sifting through remnants of a life well lived. As I rummaged through the stacks of old books, porcelain dolls, and forgotten trinkets, I stumbled upon a dusty, leather-bound journal tucked beneath a pile of yellowing newspapers. The cover was worn, and the pages had a fragile quality, their edges frayed with time. My curiosity piqued. I carefully opened it, revealing my grandmother's elegant script, flowing smoothly across the pages. The entries began innocuously, detailing her daily life, the weather, and the neighbors. But as I continued reading, the tone shifted. The words became darker, filled with unsettling reflections on dreams and visions she had experienced over the years. She wrote about feeling watched, as if unseen eyes were tracing her every move. I brushed it off as the musings of an imaginative mind, but an unease settled in the pit of my stomach. One entry detailed a recurring dream, where she found herself walking through a forest shrouded in mist. In the dream, she encountered a figure dressed in black, a shape that loomed in the shadows, always just out of reach. The dream unsettled her so deeply that she began to avoid the woods behind her house, claiming that something lingered there, something that shouldn't be disturbed. Intrigued, I recalled the woods that bordered my grandmother's property. They were thick and wild, an expanse I had explored as a child but had always felt a hint of apprehension within. Memories flooded back of my grandmother warning me to stay close, her eyes darting toward the trees with an expression I couldn't quite place. As I delved deeper into the journal, I stumbled upon the final entry, dated just a few days before her death. It spoke of an ominous feeling enveloping her, as if the forest had begun to encroach upon her home. She described hearing whispers in the night, distant and elusive, pulling at her consciousness like an unanswered question. The final lines sent a chill through me. I fear they are coming for me. I must find a way to escape. Feeling a compelling urge to understand, I set the journal aside and ventured into the woods. The path was overgrown, branches snagging at my clothes as I pushed deeper into the thicket. Each step felt heavier, the familiar sounds of nature overshadowed by an unsettling silence. The further I walked, the more the trees seemed to close in around me, their gnarled branches stretching toward the sky like skeletal fingers. As I entered a small clearing, my heart began to race. The atmosphere shifted, and a sense of being observed prickled at my skin. The quiet was unnerving, punctuated only by the rustling of leaves. It was there I spotted an old, dilapidated cabin half hidden by the underbrush. Its windows were broken, and the door hung ajar, creaking softly in the breeze. The sight of it sent a shiver down my spine, and a strong instinct told me to turn back. But a pull drew me closer, as if the cabin itself were calling me. I stepped over the threshold, the air inside stale and heavy with dust. My pulse quickened as I scanned the room, noticing remnants of furniture draped in sheets, as if they were preserving secrets long buried. It felt wrong to be there, as if the space held echoes of the past that should not be disturbed. My gaze fell upon the wall, where an old, faded photograph hung askew. It was a picture of my grandmother, taken decades ago, standing with a group of people I didn't recognize. Their expressions were serious, eyes filled with an intensity that sent a chill racing down my spine. I reached out to adjust the frame, but before I could touch it, a rustling sound erupted from the corner of the room. Heart pounding, I turned, expecting to see an animal or perhaps a breeze stirring the debris. Instead, a shadow flickered at the edge of my vision, coalescing into a dark figure that seemed to retreat further into the depths of the cabin. The sudden rush of fear coursed through me, igniting a primal instinct to flee. I bolted from the cabin, stumbling through the underbrush as branches clawed at my skin. I didn't stop running until I burst out of the woods, gasping for air, the sunlight streaming down like a warm embrace. The safety of my grandmother's house felt like a fortress, but the journal's weight pressed heavily on my mind. The connection between my grandmother's past and the woods lingered, casting a long shadow over my thoughts. In the following days, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking just beyond the tree line, a reminder of a truth buried deep within my family's history. I learned that some stories aren't meant to be unearthed, and that the past can cast long, dark shadows, beckoning those brave enough to seek the truth into its depths. It became a haunting realization that some doors should remain closed, the whispers of the past echoing in the wind, a warning that might be best heeded. Every summer, my friends and I would take the same route to our favorite swimming hole, a hidden gem located just outside our town. The path wound through a dense thicket of trees, ultimately leading to an old abandoned train track that had long since fallen into disrepair. The rails had rusted, the wooden ties decayed, but we loved the adventure of following the tracks, imagining stories of the past. One afternoon, eager to escape the summer heat, we set off on our usual trek. The sun filtered through the leaves, casting dappled shadows on the ground, and laughter filled the air as we raced each other along the path. As we neared the train tracks, an unusual stillness enveloped us. The chirping of birds seemed to fade, replaced by a dense quiet that felt almost unnatural. As we approached the old railway bridge that arched over a shallow creek, we noticed something strange. There, resting on the tracks, was an old train car. It was battered and overgrown, the vibrant colors faded into muted hues of gray and brown. The sight was unexpected, as we had never seen anything like it before. It felt as if the train car had materialized overnight, an anomaly within our familiar landscape. Drawn to the train car, we cautiously stepped closer, curiosity overshadowing the growing sense of unease. The doors hung ajar, swaying slightly in the breeze as if inviting us in. A quick exchange of glances among us was all it took, and we decided to explore, driven by a mixture of thrill and apprehension. Inside, the air felt stale, heavy with the scent of rust and dust. Old benches lined the walls, and remnants of faded advertisements clung stubbornly to the windows, offering a glimpse into a bygone era. The atmosphere shifted as we ventured deeper, the silence enveloping us like a thick fog. Shadows danced in the corners, and the stillness felt oppressive, almost watchful. As we moved through the cramped space, we stumbled upon a small room at the back, the door slightly ajar. Peering inside, we were met with an unsettling sight, a single flickering light bulb hanging from the ceiling, casting erratic shadows on the walls. The floor was littered with debris, and in the center lay a tattered old suitcase, partially open. Compelled by a mix of curiosity and dread, one of my friends knelt to examine the suitcase. Inside, we found a collection of photographs, faded black and white images of people smiling, gathered together as if on a journey. But as we continued to sift through the contents, a chill washed over us. The last photograph depicted a group of individuals standing on the very same tracks, their expressions unnervingly blank, their eyes hollow. Feeling a sense of urgency, we exchanged wary glances, the gravity of our discovery settling over us. It was as if the train car had been a portal to another time, a vessel for memories trapped in a cycle of loss. A sudden thought flashed through my mind. What if the stories of those who once traveled on this train had been left behind, unable to move on? Just then, a distant sound broke through the silence. A low rumble, faint but unmistakable. It resonated through the air, sending an icy wave of fear coursing through us. The ground beneath our feet seemed to tremble slightly, and a sense of impending dread washed over me. The sound grew louder and instinct kicked in. We needed to leave. We scrambled out of the train car, adrenaline pumping through our veins. As we raced back down the tracks, the rumbling intensified, drowning out everything else. It felt as though the very earth was alive, vibrating with an energy that urged us to flee. We dashed through the trees, branches scratching at our arms, until we finally burst into the clearing by the creek. Panting and breathless, we turned back to look at the train car. But it was gone. The tracks lay empty, devoid of any trace of the decaying vehicle that had held us captive just moments before. A wave of disbelief washed over us as we processed what had just occurred. The sun shone brightly above, the world around us unchanged. But the echo of the train's presence lingered in our minds. We never spoke of that day again, but the memory haunted us. The once familiar path to our swimming hole became tainted with an unshakable sense of fear. The train car had vanished, leaving behind only a whisper of its existence, and the eerie reminder that some places hold secrets too dark to uncover. In the years that followed, we often returned to the woods, but the thrill of adventure was replaced by an uneasy tension. It became clear that the train, the photographs, and the haunting presence we had encountered were not mere figments of our imagination. They were a chilling reminder of the stories that linger long after they've ended. Sometimes the past has a way of reaching into the present, beckoning those willing to explore the unknown and leaving them forever changed. In the summer of 2018, I took a job at a small coffee shop nestled in a quiet part of town. The shop was a cozy spot, frequented by a cast of regulars who all shared their own little quirks and stories. Among them was a man with striking blue eyes, who always occupied the same corner table. He wore a battered baseball cap, which he seemed to use as a shield from the world. At first he barely spoke. He would come in, order his coffee, and retreat into the pages of a book, his presence blending into the familiar rhythm of the shop. Over time, though, I began to notice him more. There was something unsettling about how he observed everyone around him, his gaze piercing and intense. As the days turned into weeks, he started to engage me in conversation, sharing snippets of his life in a manner that felt oddly confessional. His stories meandered from mundane observations about the weather to bizarre accounts of childhood mischief. He spoke of how he loved to collect things, old photographs, rusted tools, and even the oddest of trinkets. Each tale felt more disconcerting than the last, revealing a mind that danced on the edge of eccentricity. He often spoke of his childhood home, an old farmhouse on the outskirts of town. His descriptions painted a picture of a decaying structure filled with relics of a forgotten era, buried secrets, and a family that had seemingly vanished into thin air. As he reminisced, I noticed the flicker of something behind his eyes, a glimpse of unbridled passion mingled with a hint of madness. There was a story hidden in there, one that sparked a mix of curiosity and apprehension within me. Despite his strange tales, there was a strange magnetism about him. My co-workers and I would often find ourselves discussing him during our breaks, each of us sharing our impressions. Some found him merely odd, while others expressed discomfort, questioning why he frequented our shop so often and what he truly wanted. I shrugged it off, dismissing the unease and focusing on my work. One day I noticed that he hadn't come in. It was a small blip in the routine, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. Days turned into a week and still he didn't return. A knot of worry tightened in my stomach and whispers among the regulars grew louder. They speculated about his absence, and I felt a strange mix of relief and concern. Then, the news broke. A local woman had gone missing, her name appearing on posters plastered across town. As the details emerged, a chilling connection formed in my mind. She had been last seen near the coffee shop, walking home late one evening. My heart raced when I saw the police sketch of a man who had been seen in the vicinity, his features closely resembling those of the man with blue eyes. The realization struck me like a thunderclap, leaving me shaken and filled with dread. I couldn't help but replay our conversations in my mind, searching for clues I had missed. Did I really know him at all? Days later, as I prepared to close the shop, a sense of apprehension hung heavy in the air. Just as I was about to lock up, the door swung open and in he walked. He looked disheveled, his clothes rumpled, and his eyes wild as if he had just come from a nightmare. I felt a surge of conflicting emotions, relief to see him, yet terrified of what his presence might signify. He ordered his usual coffee, but as he sat in his corner he stared blankly into space. It was as if he were somewhere else entirely, lost in thought. A shiver crawled down my spine as I observed him, the weight of his silence oppressive. The next morning I couldn't shake the sense of unease that enveloped me. I opened the shop, but the atmosphere felt different, charged with a tension that made my skin crawl. I was filled with an urgent need to escape, to put distance between myself and the haunting eyes that seemed to pierce through me. A few days later he vanished again, this time for good. The coffee shop felt emptier without him, the corners of the room suddenly devoid of his watchful presence. The police continued their investigation into the missing woman, but the answers eluded them. The case went cold, leaving behind whispers of fear and uncertainty. Months later, the coffee shop closed its doors, and I moved away. Yet the memory of the man with the blue eyes lingered. Each time I found myself in a new cafe, the familiarity of that corner table brought back a haunting reminder of what had unfolded. It was then that I realized some stories leave an indelible mark, shadowing our thoughts and memories long after they end. I learned that darkness often hides behind the most innocent of facades, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. And sometimes it's the people we think we know best who can lead us down the most unsettling paths. It was a typical night in January when I made the decision to drive home after a gathering at a friend's house. The streets were dimly lit, the winter chill creeping into my car, making it feel more like a refuge than a mode of transport. As I navigated the empty roads, I noticed a car behind me. At first, it was just a presence in my rearview mirror, a pair of headlights that felt harmless enough. As I drove on, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The car, a dark sedan, maintained an unsettling closeness. It followed my every turn, no matter how many times I changed lanes or altered my speed. A knot of anxiety began to twist in my stomach. I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination playing tricks, a side effect of the late hour and the shadows cast by the streetlights. I drove through a quiet neighborhood, the houses standing silently behind their fences, shrouded in darkness. I glanced at the rearview mirror again, and the car was still there, an unyielding shadow against the night. My pulse quickened, and I felt a surge of fear wash over me. I began to contemplate my options. Should I speed up? Should I make a sudden turn to see if I could lose it? Each thought seemed more irrational than the last. As I approached a stop sign, I decided to make a left turn onto a less traveled road. My heart raced as I noticed the car behind me mirrored my movements. The realization sent shivers down my spine. It wasn't just a coincidence. The driver was actively pursuing me. I felt the adrenaline kick in as I pressed the gas pedal harder, desperate to put distance between us. The darkness enveloped the new road, lined with trees that loomed like sentinels. I could hear the engine of the car behind me, a constant reminder of the danger lurking in the night. The woods thickened around me, creating a feeling of isolation. I spotted a gas station in the distance, its neon lights glowing like a beacon of hope. With a surge of determination, I made a sharp turn into the parking lot. I parked my car near the entrance, my heart pounding against my ribcage. The sound of tires screeching against asphalt echoed in my ears as the sedan pulled in behind me. The driver didn't turn off their headlights, bathing my vehicle in harsh light. I stepped out of my car, my palms clammy, and glanced back. The driver remained seated, staring straight ahead, their expression hidden in shadow. A sinking feeling settled in my stomach. Was I overreacting, or was I truly in danger? I wanted to believe the latter was just paranoia, but the tension in the air told a different story. My instinct was to find safety, so I hurried toward the entrance of the gas station, trying to act nonchalant while my mind raced with thoughts of the potential confrontation. The fluorescent lights flickered as I approached the cashier, trying to appear composed. My eyes kept drifting back to the sedan, which remained stationary, its driver still cloaked in darkness. Moments passed like hours. I grabbed a bottle of water, feigning interest in the snack aisle while I stole glances toward the car. Suddenly, the driver opened the door and my heart stopped. They stepped out and began to walk toward me, but in that instant, something in their demeanor felt off. The way they moved, careful and measured, sent a shiver down my spine. Just as I was about to bolt back to my car, the cashier's voice broke through my thoughts. They greeted the stranger, who seemed to relax at the interaction. I couldn't make out their features, but the tension shifted in the air. The driver turned, and for a fleeting moment, I caught a glimpse of their face. A striking familiarity washed over me. As they walked away, I realized it was someone I recognized from my neighborhood, a neighbor I had never spoken to but had seen walking their dog countless times. The pressure in my chest slowly eased, replaced by confusion and embarrassment. I had allowed my imagination to spiral out of control, my fear amplifying an innocent encounter. With my heart still racing, I made my way back to my car. I couldn't shake the unease completely, but I forced myself to breathe deeply. The drive home was quieter, the streets now feeling strangely familiar, as if nothing had happened at all. Yet the encounter lingered in my mind. What had seemed like a menacing chase transformed into a reminder of the power of perception. It showed me how easily fear can twist reality, creating shadows where there are none. Though I arrived home safely, the memory of that night served as a haunting lesson, a reminder that danger often lies not in the darkness outside, but in the shadows cast by our own minds. It was during the summer of 2021 when I decided to embark on a hiking trip with a few friends to explore a remote forest area known for its picturesque views and serene atmosphere. We had all been looking forward to escaping the hustle of daily life, eager to reconnect with nature and each other. The early morning sun broke through the trees as we set out, illuminating the path ahead with a warm golden hue. As we ventured deeper into the forest, laughter filled the air, a refreshing contrast to the tranquility that enveloped us. The sounds of birds chirping and leaves rustling created a sense of peace. Everything felt perfect, but as the day progressed, the atmosphere subtly shifted. Shadows grew longer and the vibrant colors of the forest began to fade, giving way to a muted palette of greens and browns. Around midday, we stumbled upon a clearing. It was beautiful, with wildflowers swaying in the gentle breeze. But something felt off. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, yet a vague sense of unease crept over me. My friends seemed oblivious, laughing and snapping photos. But I felt an inexplicable pull toward the tree line that bordered the clearing. I walked to the edge, peering into the dense thicket. The trees stood tall and foreboding, their trunks thick and gnarled. I strained to see beyond the underbrush, the shadows between the branches flickering as if something was shifting within. I shuddered, brushing off the sensation as paranoia. We decided to continue on our hike, the path narrowing as we entered a less traveled area of the forest. It felt like we were walking into another world, one where time had forgotten its existence. The laughter of my friends faded into whispers as the trees thickened around us, towering and oppressive. It was as if the forest had a consciousness, observing our every move, shifting its shapes to create a labyrinth that confined us. After what felt like hours of hiking, we stopped for a break. We sat on a fallen log, drinking water and recounting old stories, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig sent my heart racing. My gaze kept drifting toward the trees, where dark shapes seemed to linger just beyond sight. Each time I turned, I found nothing but the same dense foliage. My friends suggested we take a different route back, hoping to explore a trail they had heard about. Against my better judgment, I agreed, despite the growing discomfort in my chest. The atmosphere grew heavier, the silence of the forest amplifying my anxiety. With each step, I felt the eyes of the trees upon us, their presence more tangible than ever. As we pressed on, the sunlight dwindled, swallowed by the thick canopy above. The shadows deepened, wrapping around us like a shroud. I could sense a change in my friends. Their laughter diminished, replaced by an unspoken tension. We quickened our pace, but the forest felt like a living entity, twisting and turning in ways that disoriented us. Then we stumbled upon an old cabin, weathered and half hidden by the undergrowth. Its wooden walls were cracked, the roof sagging as if it had given in to time. It seemed abandoned, yet something about it drew us in. Against my better instincts we approached, curiosity piquing despite the gnawing unease that filled the pit of my stomach. The door creaked as we pushed it open, revealing a dark interior filled with dust and debris. The air was stale, holding onto remnants of a past life. Old furniture lay scattered, overrun by mold and decay. The silence was oppressive, suffocating, and I felt an urge to leave the place immediately. My friends, however, seemed captivated by the eerie ambiance, exploring with a mix of excitement and trepidation. As we roamed through the cabin, I caught sight of something outside, a fleeting shadow darting between the trees. My heart raced as I moved closer to the window, squinting into the thick foliage. There, amid the shadows, were those dark shapes I had sensed earlier. They appeared to be watching us, their forms shifting as if cloaked in the very essence of the forest. The moment I blinked, they were gone. I turned back to my friends, but their expressions had changed. Confusion etched their faces, eyes darting toward the door. I felt an overwhelming sense of urgency. We had to leave. I urged them to head back outside, my instincts screaming at me to get out of that cabin and away from the watchful eyes lurking just beyond the tree line. We stepped outside, the fading light casting long shadows that danced around us. The forest felt alive, its whispers echoing in our ears, urging us to leave. We hurried down the trail, but every rustle of leaves seemed amplified, echoing the pounding of my heart. The trees closed in around us, their trunks looming like ancient sentinels, and the sensation of being watched intensified. Finally, we broke free from the oppressive woods, emerging onto a wider trail that led us back to civilization. The sun dipped below the horizon, leaving a lingering twilight as we hurried towards safety. Our breaths came in ragged gasps, the adrenaline coursing through our veins. Though we eventually made it back to our car, a lingering feeling remained. The forest had held its secrets close, whispering to us in the language of shadows. The eyes I'd sensed in the trees stayed with me, a haunting reminder of the boundaries between the familiar and the unknown. I learned that some places conceal darkness beneath their beauty, waiting for the unwary to venture too far, too deep into their depths. Even now, when I think of that day, I can still feel those eyes watching, a silent warning from the woods that I would never forget. In a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind where children ride bicycles in the streets and neighbors greet each other with warm smiles, a peculiar event shattered the peace. It was the summer of 2019 when 6-year-old Lily vanished without a trace. Her disappearance was sudden and disconcerting, sending ripples of anxiety through the tight-knit community. One moment she was playing outside, the next, she was gone, as if the ground had swallowed her whole. Lily had been a bright, cheerful girl, known for her laughter and curiosity. Her absence was felt deeply by everyone. The neighborhood organized search parties, scouring the nearby parks and wooded areas. Flyers with her face adorned every telephone pole and storefront window, a desperate plea for help echoing through the streets. Days turned into weeks, and still there was no sign of her. The search seemed to yield nothing but despair. As time passed, an unsettling atmosphere settled over the community. What had once been a joyful place now felt tinged with fear and suspicion. Conversations turned hushed, and parents grew increasingly wary of letting their children play outside. The vibrant laughter that had once filled the air was replaced with whispers of anxiety and speculation. Each time a child rode past on a bike, parents' eyes darted anxiously, watching closely. Then, just as hope began to fade, a strange incident occurred that turned the unease into palpable dread. On a bright Saturday afternoon, a group of children was playing in a nearby park, their shouts of joy echoing in the warm breeze. Suddenly, they began to scream, drawing the attention of nearby adults. When the adults rushed over, they found the children huddled together, pointing toward the trees at the edge of the park. In the distance, just beyond the tree line, a figure stood watching. It was a man, tall and thin, dressed in dark clothing that seemed to blend into the shadows of the forest. His face was obscured, but his posture radiated a strange stillness. The way he stood there, unmoving, sent shivers down the spines of those who gazed upon him. As if sensing the growing crowd, the figure slowly turned and retreated deeper into the woods, disappearing into the underbrush. The sight triggered a wave of panic. Parents hurried to gather their children, the laughter and playfulness instantly vanishing. The air was thick with fear as people shared hushed theories. Who was the man? Was he connected to Lily's disappearance? A shadow of dread settled over the neighborhood and rumors spread like wildfire. In the following days, the atmosphere grew even more tense. Every rustle in the bushes, every creak of the floorboards was met with suspicion. Residents began to scrutinize anyone who wandered too close to the neighborhood. Fearful parents refused to let their children out of their sight, and children who had once played freely now stayed indoors, staring out the windows with wide eyes. Then, the unthinkable happened. Reports surfaced of another child disappearing, a boy from a nearby town. The news sent shockwaves through the community. The local authorities ramped up their search efforts, canvassing the area and conducting interviews. The police presence in the neighborhood became a constant reminder of the dark shadow looming over their once safe haven. Amidst the chaos, a sense of unease permeated the air. I began to notice things around me that I had once overlooked. Strange vehicles parked on the street, unfamiliar faces lingering at the edges of the neighborhood. I found myself peering out the window more often, scrutinizing every passerby. The man from the park had become a ghost, a figure haunting our thoughts and dreams. The neighborhood meetings turned into gatherings of fear. Residents shared their fears and experiences, weaving a tapestry of paranoia. They discussed potential suspects, all while clutching their children tightly, the innocence of youth eclipsed by the looming threat. As the sun set earlier each day, shadows grew longer, wrapping around our homes like tendrils of dread. Weeks turned into months, and despite the increased vigilance, the fear never dissipated. Just as the community began to settle into a fragile sense of normalcy, another chilling event occurred. One evening as dusk fell, a young girl who lived 2 streets over disappeared from her yard. The news spread like wildfire, igniting a new wave of panic. The atmosphere shifted again, suffocating in its intensity. In the days that followed, whispers circulated about the man in the woods, about possible connections to the disappearances. Speculation turned to accusation, and the once close-knit community began to fracture under the weight of fear. Neighbors eyed each other with suspicion, wondering if the person next door harbored a secret. The man had become an embodiment of our darkest fears, his presence haunting the collective consciousness. As the summer faded into fall, the search for the missing children continued, but hope dwindled. With each passing day, it felt as if the darkness deepened. The community had transformed from a place of laughter and joy into a landscape marked by uncertainty and fear. The shadows seemed to whisper secrets, and the once vibrant streets felt lifeless and cold. I found myself reflecting on Lily's disappearance more often, haunted by the thought of what could have happened to her. The innocence of childhood had been eclipsed, leaving behind a lingering question. What lurked in the shadows of our peaceful neighborhood? Even as the days turned to weeks and then months, the memory of those children and the man who had set the wheels of fear in motion remained etched in my mind. As I stared out the window one evening, the sun sinking below the horizon, I realized that some scars never heal. The fear that had taken root in our community transformed not just the streets, but the very fabric of our lives. The laughter of children had been replaced by an unsettling silence, a constant reminder of the vulnerability of innocence. The shadows remained, and the truth of what happened to Lily and the others lingered just out of reach, forever shrouded in mystery. It was a cool autumn evening in 2018 when I found myself driving down a long, isolated road that wound through dense woods. I had taken this route many times before, but tonight felt different. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting an orange glow that gradually faded into an inky blue. Trees flanked the road, their branches heavy with leaves that rustled in the soft breeze. As the last remnants of daylight disappeared, an unsettling sense of isolation enveloped me. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional chirp of crickets and the rhythmic sound of my tires on the asphalt. I turned up the radio, hoping to drown out the quiet, but the music did little to alleviate the tension in the air. Suddenly, my headlights caught a figure standing by the side of the road. It was a woman, seemingly lost, dressed in a light jacket that fluttered slightly in the wind. My heart raced as I slowed down, considering whether to stop and help. I felt a pull of empathy, but a nagging instinct held me back. It was late, and the isolation of the surroundings unnerved me. I hesitated, my mind racing through the possibilities. Could she be in trouble, or was this a setup? I looked in my rearview mirror, but the darkness behind me only deepened. I took a breath, trying to calm the storm of thoughts. As I drove past, I stole a glance at her. Her face was pale, illuminated by my headlights, and her eyes seemed to shimmer with a strange intensity. A shiver coursed through me, prompting me to glance back at the road ahead. The moment I did, I heard a loud thud on the back of my car, jolting me. My heart dropped as I instinctively pressed on the accelerator, the car lurching forward into the night. Panic surged within me as I glanced in the rearview mirror again. The woman was now standing still, her figure receding into the shadows. I dared not stop. My hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, as the sound of my tires on the road became a frantic rhythm against the encroaching darkness. The stillness of the forest felt heavier, pressing in around me, creating an atmosphere of unease. With each mile I drove, the feeling of being watched grew more pronounced. It was as if the trees themselves were closing in, their gnarled branches reaching toward my car. The shadows flickered in my periphery, teasing at the corners of my vision. I struggled to focus on the road, anxiety gnawing at the edges of my mind. As I neared a sharp bend in the road, I caught another glimpse of her. The woman stood further down, now at the edge of the tree line, her figure almost blending into the darkness. I couldn't shake the image from my mind, nor the strange sensation that she was beckoning me closer. I forced myself to look away, unwilling to let the fear and curiosity pull me back into that ominous presence. Suddenly, my headlights illuminated something else in the distance, a flicker of movement. I squinted, heart pounding, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It was another figure, this one moving through the trees, darting between the trunks with an unnerving swiftness. Panic took hold, and I pressed down on the gas pedal, urging the car to go faster. The road ahead seemed to stretch infinitely, but I was determined to put as much distance between myself and that dreadful scene as possible. The headlights flickered over the road, and just then, I spotted a familiar landmark, the old gas station I had passed many times. Relief washed over me, and I drove into the parking lot, tires screeching as I came to a halt. I sat there for a moment, trying to catch my breath, my heart racing. I scanned the area for any sign of the woman or the figure I had seen in the woods, but the lot was deserted. It was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that presses down on you, urging you to leave. I stayed in my car, taking a moment to collect my thoughts. The shadows loomed around the edges of the station, threatening to close in on me. The last remnants of daylight faded completely, plunging everything into darkness. Deciding to call for help, I fumbled for my phone, but my heart sank as I realized I had no service. A wave of dread washed over me. I was truly alone out there, isolated on that dark road. A chill ran down my spine as I considered my options. Should I risk driving back, or should I stay put and hope that someone else would come along? Moments stretched into what felt like hours. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, a sensation that gnawed at my sanity. I glanced out the window, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw a shape dart behind the station, but when I turned my head fully, nothing was there. The unease coiled tightly within me. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I mustered the courage to leave the safety of my car. I wanted to make my way to the convenience store attached to the gas station, hoping to find help, or at least a familiar face. As I stepped out, the chill of the night settled around me, the darkness swallowing the warmth of my breath. The lights flickered above me, casting a weak glow on the pavement. I hurried toward the entrance, every instinct screaming at me to turn back. The door creaked open, revealing a dusty interior filled with forgotten items. The shelves were lined with old products, their expiration dates long past, but there was no sign of life. No clerk, no customers, nothing but silence. It was as if the world had abandoned this place. A sense of dread filled me as I turned back to the door, the shadows behind me deepening. Just then, I heard a rustle outside, drawing my attention. I squinted into the darkness, heart pounding as I waited for something to emerge. Nothing came. The emptiness of the night felt oppressive, as though it were holding its breath, waiting for the moment when I would let my guard down. I retreated back to my car, the weight of that isolating road still fresh in my mind. Once inside, I locked the doors and glanced around, convinced I could still sense those eyes watching from the shadows. I turned on my engine, determined to drive away from the dread of that place. As I pulled out of the lot and back onto the road, I felt an urgency to escape, to leave behind whatever had lingered in the darkness. As I drove away, I caught a glimpse of the woman standing at the edge of the trees, her pale face illuminated for a brief moment by my headlights. A chill ran down my spine as I accelerated, the shadows swallowing her form once more. That night haunted me for weeks, the memory of her and the figures I had glimpsed remaining etched in my mind. The isolated road had shown me the fragility of safety, a reminder that darkness can hide unimaginable truths. I had escaped, but the memory of that evening lingered, a testament to the unseen horrors that can lurk just out of sight, waiting patiently for the next traveler to wander too close.